Good morning, Dan and Amy. So, after our depressing conversation about the governor's race and
Yes.
Illinois politics in generally, I need something to lift my spirits. And
To cleanse your palate.
fortunately, we're in luck. This story of Matrix 4, which plastic injection molding company in Woodstock, and it's a real turnaround story, engineered by the granddaughter of the founders of the company's founder, who was also part of a contingent of manufacturing executives who met with Donald Trump last week. And we're pleased to be joined by Patricia Miller, the president and CEO of Matrix 4 in Woodstock. Miss Miller, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Of course. Good morning.
Good morning. And so before we get to your meeting with the president and how that went, tell us a little bit about your story, because I was reading from some clips from a couple years ago, and your manufacturing business, your family's manufacturing business in Woodstock was on the brink of extinction, and you're a young woman, which is unusual in the manufacturing space, women in general, and particularly young women, you turned it around.
Yes, I feel like we're still in the middle of that turnaround process, but we're almost 3 years in. The company definitely had seen better days, but in the last few years with the global economy opening up and the recession, wasn't in a good place when I had taken it over.
So what did you do? How did you change it?
I think it was a myriad of things. We had to look at what was our strategy, what were we doing from a cultural standpoint, how did we bring on board a team, looking at what kind of customers we wanted to support, and just looking overall at where manufacturing was headed and where there were gaps in the marketplace that we could fill.
And so, what was your background? Did you grow up working in the company, or did you go off and get an MBA and all that, and come back to the company? How did it all come to be?
I always was around the company, having grown up with a family business. That happens most of the time. It doesn't leave dinner table conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't engaged in the business until I decided to come back and take it over. My background was mostly in marketing. I was a marketing executive for the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry, focused on commercialization of drugs and launching brands globally and in the U.S.
And tell us what it's like to run a manufacturing business, particularly one that's in the midst of a turnaround in Illinois.
It's no easy feat, that's for sure, but it's definitely the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I have a great team and great people around me, and I'm super passionate about what is our next chapter in American manufacturing and being part of it.
How many employees do you have?
I have 49 now. I started with just a handful 2.5 years ago, so it's been nice to see the company grow, and I think that's the best part about manufacturing companies or small businesses in general, that we're supporting local economies and communities.
And so when you were part of this contingent in conjunction with the National Association of Manufacturers that went to the White House to visit with President Trump, what was the collective message and even your individual message?
I think the collective message was the survey results that the National Association of Manufacturing had published from the last quarter, which had shown a high amount of optimism that was not consistent previously and was an all-time high in the last 20 years. And I think that was attributed to several things that their survey had cited, one of those being manufacturers' optimism in their own growth potential this year, and having an administration that was supporting businesses and some of the things that are on the table impacting small to mid-sized manufacturers. And then individually, I think my message is making sure that I'm being engaged in this industry and having a seat at the table to have the conversation around what is important for us and how do we all make sure collectively we're looking at how do we keep this industry viable and moving forward.
So the time you spent with President Trump, it wasn't just a photo op. Do you believe that he genuinely cares about small manufacturers and small business owners?
Yes. After the press left, we had a roundtable conversation with him. But I think that's one thing he's demonstrated clearly is that he's wanting to keep the promises from the campaign trail And one of those was around how are we supporting American manufacturing and how are we removing some of the red tape, looking at regulations a little bit smarter, and making sure that we're keeping a closer look on an industry segment that's been important in our history.
What are the inhibitors to growth for you and your company? Where do they mainly come from a policy perspective? Is it mainly federal policy that needs to change and that would unleash more growth potential for you, or is it state and local policy?
I think it's a factor of both. Definitely from my perspective, what my biggest inhibitor has been is just access to capital and growth. And as you know, manufacturing is very capital intensive, just given the machinery and all of the equipment that's associated with it and the higher labor demand. And so when I was looking at creating growth year over year and needing to do it starting at 0 and growing it into 1, that's been the biggest hurdle for me, is just making sure access to capital and the regulations that are around access to capital were important for me. And I think for manufacturing overall, we face a few things. We face a higher burden of regulations. We face high healthcare costs. We face challenges in workforce development and attracting or retaining younger talent into the sector. And I think all of those exist on a more local level and a national level.
Where do you see your company, say, 10 years from now?
Being an amazing design and manufacturing house and supporting a local economy here and supporting our customers.
And just going back to what you said about the local policy impacts, and we see this in Illinois, you just look at the aggregate numbers and they tell you something about the number of manufacturing jobs created since the bottom of the recession in Illinois as compared to all of our Midwestern neighbors, where it's a fraction of the recovery. And so if you had a single message to send to all of the nitwits in the General Assembly, what would it be in terms of what they should be doing to unleash the creative potential of businesses like yours?
I absolutely agree with you. I think that we need to take a hard look at how do we retain or attract companies staying in Illinois or coming to Illinois. And I don't know if we've done a great job of that as of late. And I think that comes from local politicians as well as state politicians. And what is their strategy, and how are we ensuring that we don't have more companies leaving to go across our borders? And I think that comes from a host of things, all the way down to just supporting how do we foster growth in smaller economies, and how do we make sure that we're having the conversations with the businesses that are in our economies to see what they're facing and what's inhibiting growth.
All right. She is Patricia Miller. She's the CEO of Matrix 4 in Woodstock manufacturing company. She was part of the National Association of Manufacturing contingent that met with President Trump last week, and she's been covered quite extensively for this incredible turnaround that, as she described, she's in the middle of. So, Patricia Miller, congratulations on your success so far and continued success in the future.
Thank you both.
Thanks. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.